My name is Evans Lamont, and I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our house wasn't fancy, just a modest place tucked in an aging neighborhood, but to me, it was the whole world. It was home to me, my younger sister Melody, our mother, and the man I knew as my father. From the outside, we probably looked like any other small family. But from a young age, I began to feel a strange chill that had nothing to do with the weather. My earliest memories are filled with warmth that came solely from my mother. She had a soft voice, gentle hands, and eyes that somehow made you feel safe even in silence. She would sing me lullabies when I had trouble sleeping and press cool cloths against my forehead when I was sick. She made sure my homework was done, my clothes were clean, and that I never felt invisible, but that warmth didn't extend to my father. Or maybe I should say her partner, because something about the way he looked at me never felt quite right. He wasn't outright cruel at first, not in the way you'd expect abuse to show itself, but there was always a distance, a tension that lingered like an unspoken rule. He barely acknowledged me unless it was to point out something I'd done wrong. There were no bedtime stories, no pats on the back, no father-son talks. Just silence or sharp words. With Melody, things were different. She was 3 years younger than me and the apple of his eye. He'd laugh with her, carry her on his shoulders, surprise her with toys, and call her sweet nicknames. I watched all of this from the sidelines, pretending not to care. But inside, it stung like hell. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe boys weren't supposed to get hugs or bedtime kisses after a certain age. But the contrast was undeniable. If Melody spilled juice, it was met with a chuckle and a towel. If I forgot to rinse my plate, I got a lecture. If she got a bad grade, it was the teacher's fault. If I got one, it was because I was lazy. I began to wonder what I had done wrong. Was I not smart enough? Not obedient enough? Not enough, period. Even when I tried to win his affection, helped with chores without being asked, brought home decent grades, stayed out of trouble, nothing changed. His coldness never thawed. The few times I tried to ask Mom about it, she'd smile sadly and say, "Your father loves you in his own way." But it didn't feel like love. It felt like rejection. That's when I started questioning my place in the family. Why did I always feel like a guest in my own home? Like I belonged, but only barely. I didn't have the words for it back then. But I knew deep down, something wasn't right, and in time, I would find out just how deep that truth ran. As I grew older, the confusion only deepened. The gap between me and the man I called Dad widened with each passing year. It wasn't just the absence of love, it was the presence of something colder, something I couldn't name at the time. He was polite when others were around, but when it was just the four of us, his silence toward me spoke volumes. I kept hoping it would change. Maybe if I got better at soccer. Maybe if I aced all my tests. Maybe if I kept my room spotless or stayed out of his way completely. I lived in a constant state of trying, not to be great, but simply to be noticed. I wasn't looking for gifts or praise. All I wanted was a moment of connection, a smile, a pat on the head, or even just a few kind words. But they never came. Melody, on the other hand, never had to try. She could fall asleep on the couch and he'd carry her to bed like a princess. She could throw a tantrum and he'd laugh it off. Sometimes I wondered if I was adopted or if he was simply allergic to me. I didn't hate my sister, not even a little, but I hated how invisible I felt next to her. School became an escape, though not for the reasons you'd expect. I wasn't especially popular or athletic, but at least there I didn't feel so out of place. I'd watch the other kids talk about their dads, fishing trips, weekend outings, goofy stories, and I'd force a smile and pretend I had some of those memories too. I didn't. My weekends were filled with silence, chores, and pretending everything was okay. I tried asking my mom once, really asking, not in a joking way, but from a place of pain. "Why doesn't Dad like me?" I asked her late one evening as she folded laundry. She paused for a second too long, then looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You're imagining things." He's just not good at showing it, that's all. It wasn't an answer, it was a quiet plea to drop the subject. And I did. I always did. Because even though I was hurting, I could see that she was too. She wore her sadness like a second skin. She'd smile, but her eyes didn't join in. There were nights I heard her crying softly behind her bedroom door. I didn't know why. I just knew I didn't want to add to her pain, so I stayed silent. I swallowed my questions, my anger, my hurt. I stopped trying so hard. I told myself this was just how families worked, some people got more, and some learned to live with less. But deep inside, something in me began to shift. A crack had formed, a small fracture in how I saw myself and the world around me. That's where the emotional scars began. Not with shouting or violence, but with neglect, indifference, and the kind of silence that screams. I was 15 the night everything shattered. It had been a regular weekday evening. I came home from school exhausted, my backpack heavy with assignments and my mind even heavier with thoughts. After grabbing a quick snack, I dove into my homework at the kitchen table. I hadn't even noticed the time slipping by. I just wanted to get things done so I could avoid any reason for him to find fault with me. I heard the front door slam a little past 9. My stomach tightened. He was home, and he was drunk. I could always tell by the way his keys clattered to the floor, the uneven rhythm of his footsteps, and the muttered curses under his breath. He stumbled into the kitchen, eyes bloodshot and heavy with something darker than alcohol. "You didn't do the damn dishes," he slurred, his voice already rising. I stood up quickly, startled. I was just finishing up my homework. I was going to do them right after. He moved closer, reeking of beer and bitterness. "Always got an excuse, don't you?" He snapped, his finger jabbing the air between us. "Lazy. Just like your damn." He stopped himself, but the rage in his face said more than words could. "I said I was going to do them," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are you always like this with me?" That's when he said it. The words that cracked the earth beneath my feet. "Because you're not even mine." The room went silent. My heart stopped. I thought maybe I'd misheard him, maybe the alcohol made him say something he didn't mean. "What? What do you mean?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "I mean I don't give a damn what happens to you." He snarled. "You think I care if you pass or fail? You were never my responsibility to begin with." I stood there frozen. My legs felt like they might give out. I didn't cry. Not then. I just turned and walked down the hallway to my room, my ears ringing. I shut the door quietly behind me and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at nothing. An hour later, when I was sure he'd passed out in front of the TV, I knocked softly on my mother's door. She opened it, still in her robe, eyes tired but calm. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "Is it true? What he said, that I'm not his?" Her expression changed. Just slightly. "But it was enough. He was drunk," she said quickly. "He didn't mean any of that. Don't listen to him, baby." "But is it true?" I pressed. She looked away, the silence between us louder than ever before. "Go to bed, Evans. We'll talk about it another time." But we never did. And I never looked at either of them the same way again. That night didn't just change my understanding of who I was, it broke something in me that I couldn't name, something that would take years to rebuild. After that night, something inside me shut down. I moved through the days like a shadow, quiet and invisible. My stepfather didn't speak to me unless it was to bark an order or throw a jab. My mother avoided eye contact. She kept pretending everything was fine, cooking meals, folding laundry, humming to herself like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I no longer felt like a son, I felt like a secret. 3 months later, I packed my bag and left. I didn't make a scene. I waited until everyone was asleep, slipped out the front door, and boarded a Greyhound bus heading to Salt Lake City. My aunt, Mom's older sister, had always lived there. We hadn't been especially close. But I remembered her kind eyes and the way she always hugged me just a little tighter than everyone else during family visits. I didn't know if she'd take me in, but I had no other plan. I just knew I couldn't stay. When I showed up at her front door, tired, cold, and holding everything I owned in a duffel bag, she didn't ask questions. She pulled me into her arms and said, "You're safe now, baby." Those words made me cry for the first time in a long time. Adjusting to life in Utah wasn't easy. It was quieter, colder, and everything felt unfamiliar. I enrolled at the local high school and tried to blend in. I kept to myself mostly, still carrying the weight of what I'd left behind. But my aunt, bless her heart, never pushed me. She gave me space when I needed it, but she was always there, whether it was a hot meal after school or a silent presence in the living room while I stared blankly at the TV. Over time, I began to open up. Not all at once. It came in pieces, one late-night chat at the kitchen table, a quiet car ride, a casual comment during a walk. And bit by bit, she started sharing too. I always knew something wasn't right back home, she told me one evening. Stirring soup on the stove. Your mother tried to keep everything hidden, but I saw it in your eyes every time I visited. The silence. The sadness. I finally asked her the question my mother refused to answer: was he really not my dad? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. No, he wasn't. Your mother was already pregnant when she met him. She thought marrying him would give you a chance at a normal life. Normal. That word felt like a joke. I wish she'd just told me, I whispered. She was scared, my aunt said softly. But she was wrong to keep it from you. Those late-night talks became my therapy. For the first time in my life, I had an adult who didn't lie, didn't dismiss, and didn't avoid the hard truths. She didn't just give me a roof over my head, she gave me back a sense of belonging. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The truth, once spoken out loud, didn't bring relief, it brought a storm. After my aunt confirmed that the man who raised me wasn't my real father, I felt like my entire life had been built on a foundation of lies. Every awkward hug, every cold glance. Every time he ignored me suddenly made sense, but instead of peace, it brought a new kind of pain. It meant that all along, he had treated me that way not because I failed to be a good son, but because I wasn't his son at all. And the worst part? Everyone knew except me. I sat in my aunt's kitchen long after she went to bed that night, staring into nothing, trying to connect the dots of my past to this new reality. I thought about the times I begged for his attention, how I worked so hard for approval I'd never receive. I thought about my mom and how she had watched me suffer in silence, knowing the truth but choosing to keep it hidden. I wasn't just hurt, I was angry. The next morning, I asked my aunt everything I could think of. Who was he? Do you know his name? Did he know about me? Why didn't she tell me sooner? She sat me down and explained what little she knew. Your mother met your biological father when she was very young. He was someone she cared for deeply, but they didn't stay together long. She found out she was pregnant just before things fell apart. She never told him, at least, I don't think she did. I couldn't believe it. My real father didn't even know I existed. That truth lit something inside me. I had to find him. I didn't care how long it took or how difficult the journey would be. I needed to know who he was, what kind of man he had been, where he came from, and whether there was any part of him in me beyond the biology. I needed answers to questions that had haunted me for years without me even knowing. I started with what little information my aunt had: his first name, where he'd been living when he met my mother, and a vague memory of him working at a repair shop. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever had. I spent hours online after school, scrolling through records, messaging strangers, digging through social media profiles of people with similar names. Every time I hit a dead end, I reminded myself this was bigger than curiosity. This was about reclaiming something I'd been denied my whole life. It wasn't just about finding a man. It was about finding a piece of myself. Because for 15 years, I'd lived with a question no one had been brave enough to answer, and now that I finally knew the truth, I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered the rest. The search for my father became an obsession. Every day after school, I'd rush home, grab my aunt's old laptop, and dive back into the digital rabbit hole. I scrolled through dozens of names, scoured online obituary archives, and even joined local community forums in the area where my aunt said he used to live. Piece by piece, I built a rough sketch of a man I had never met, a name, a workplace, an old address, a face that might have looked like mine. Hope was a strange thing. It kept me going, even when the trail grew cold. I imagined what it might be like to hear his voice, to sit across from him and ask him everything I had held inside for years. Did he know about me? Would he have wanted me? Would I see myself in his eyes? Then one evening, after weeks of searching, I found him. His name was there in an online obituary, dated just 6 months earlier. There was a photo, a black and white headshot of a man with kind eyes and a familiar brow line. He looked like me. The brief write-up said he'd passed peacefully in his sleep, survived by no spouse, no children, just a few distant cousins and friends. I sat there, numb, staring at the screen. He was gone, after everything, the questions, the pain, the digging, he was already gone. The one person who might have held the answers I so desperately needed had slipped away before I even knew he existed. The door I had fought so hard to reach had already closed. Grief hit me in a strange, unfamiliar way. How do you mourn someone you never knew? I didn't have memories of us fishing or talking or laughing. I didn't even know what his voice sounded like. And yet, I cried for him. For the version of my life that might have been. For the connection I would never make. For the empty space that had just gotten even bigger. My aunt found me that night curled up on the couch, silent tears streaming down my face. I handed her the laptop. She read the obituary and put her arms around me without saying a word. It's not fair, I whispered. I didn't even get the chance. No, she said softly. You didn't. And I'm so sorry for that. For days, I walked around feeling hollow. I looked in the mirror and wondered what parts of him lived in me, my stubbornness, my quiet nature, my love for music. I'd never know for sure. And that unknown hurt more than I expected, but in time, I realized something important. Even though I never got to meet him, the search had changed me. It had answered some questions and opened others. It had shown me how much truth matters, and how deeply lies can wound. I didn't find the father I was looking for. But I found the strength to keep moving forward. And that, in its own way, was something. After the loss of the father I never met, I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. Grief had weighed me down long enough, and I needed something, anything, to give my life direction. I was still in Utah, still under my aunt's roof, but the walls were starting to close in. I wasn't thriving. I was merely surviving. School had already slipped through my fingers. The emotional toll of everything I'd been through made it hard to focus, and my grades had taken a serious hit. Eventually, I dropped out. It wasn't a proud moment, but deep down, I knew that classroom walls were never going to hold the answers I needed. I needed to create something of my own. That's when music came into my life, not as background noise, but as therapy. It started with beats. I found free software online and spent hours messing with loops, layering sounds, and playing with samples. I didn't know what I was doing at first, but it felt right. Music gave me a way to express things I didn't have words for. Pain. Loss. Anger. Hope. It all found its place in the rhythm, my aunt noticed. She'd peek into my room and smile, sometimes even nodding to the beat while she folded laundry nearby. She didn't fully understand what I was building, but she never discouraged me. She gave me the space and support I needed, and after everything I'd been through, that meant the world. As my skills improved, I started posting my work online. I got a few likes, a few reposts, and even a message from a small-time artist asking if I could produce a track for him. It wasn't much, but it lit a fire inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose. Not just survival, but ambition. Florida had always fascinated me. It had a growing music scene, especially for up-and-coming producers. And more importantly, it felt like the kind of place where someone could start over. No past. No labels. Just talent and hustle. I told my aunt my plan over dinner one night. She listened carefully, then placed her hand on mine and said, "If this is what you want, I believe in you. Just promise me one thing, don't stop believing in yourself." With a few $100s saved from odd jobs, I packed my bag again. But this time, I wasn't running from anything, I was running towards something. I caught a bus to Florida with nothing but a laptop, a pair of headphones, and a dream that burned in my chest. As the sun rose over the highway, I stared out the window and smiled. For the first time in my life, I wasn't haunted by who I was or what I'd lost, I was finally chasing who I was meant to become. Florida was hot, loud, and fast, everything Utah wasn't. I arrived with nothing but my laptop, a cracked pair of headphones, and a fire inside me that refused to die out. I found a cheap room to rent in a rough part of town, sharing space with roaches and walls thin enough to hear every neighbor's conversation. But I didn't care. This was my new beginning, and I was determined to make it count. Starting out was hard, brutally hard. I didn't know anyone in the city. I had no professional equipment, no industry contacts, and barely enough money to eat. I spent my days working odd jobs, stocking shelves at a dollar store, unloading trucks at night, while my evenings were devoted to music. I'd work until my hands were blistered and sore, then come home and create beats until sunrise. Some nights, I questioned everything. Was I crazy for thinking I could turn this into something real? I had no degree, no backup plan, no family fortune. But I had one thing, grit. And that grit kept me moving forward when everything else told me to quit. Slowly, things began to change. I started uploading my beats to online marketplaces. At first, no one noticed. But then a rapper from Atlanta bought one of my tracks. He sent me a message, "You got something, man." That one message kept me going for another month. Soon, more people started reaching out, small artists, indie singers, podcast producers. My sound was raw, but it was real. Every beat carried a piece of my story, and people felt it. I reinvested every dollar I made. I upgraded my headphones, bought a better laptop, and rented time in a real studio when I could afford it. One day, a local producer named Jamal heard one of my tracks through a mutual contact. He invited me to his studio. I expected a quick meet and greet, but instead, we talked for hours. He told me he saw a younger version of himself in me. That day, he offered to mentor me, not just musically, but in the business side of things. Under Jamal's guidance, I learned how to price my work, protect my rights, and negotiate deals. My confidence grew. My client list expanded. Soon, I wasn't just producing beats, I was building a brand. In less than 3 years, I launched my own music production company. I hired a small team, opened a studio space, and began working with rising artists across the country. My work got featured in YouTube series, commercials, and even indie films, and then it happened. A major artist picked one of my tracks and it went viral. The royalties flooded in. New opportunities followed, brand deals, label collaborations, even speaking gigs. Before I turned 24, I had become a self-made millionaire, but this wasn't just about money. It was about breaking chains of silence, rejection, and pain. I had taken the broken pieces of my past and turned them into something powerful. I had built more than a business, I had built myself. I was in the middle of a studio session when I saw her name flash on my phone, Mom. It had been years since we last spoke. After I left for Utah, communication had faded into silence. She never reached out, and I never had the courage, or the desire, to bridge the gap. I told myself I was over it. I told myself I didn't need answers anymore. But when her name appeared on my screen, my heart didn't get the memo. I ignored the call. But later that night, curiosity won. I sat in my car outside the studio and called her back. Her voice was soft, older, more fragile than I remembered. There was a pause before she spoke, and then came the words I'd never expected to hear: "I'm sorry, Evans. For everything." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My chest tightened as I listened. She went on to tell me things I never knew: how my stepfather had been emotionally and physically abusive, not just to me, but to her as well. How fear had kept her frozen, and shame had kept her silent. She told me she stayed because she thought it was best for us. That giving me a roof, even under a cold-hearted man, was better than the uncertainty of raising me alone. I was weak, she said, voice trembling. And I failed you. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt sad. Sad for the young woman who must have been so scared and alone. Sad for the little boy inside me who had longed for truth and warmth. "I forgive you," I said quietly, not because it erased the past. Not because everything made sense now. But because I needed to let go. Holding on to that pain had helped me survive, but it wasn't helping me live. She told me she had finally left him, packed her bags and walked away after Melody moved out for college. She was living in a tiny apartment in Milwaukee, working part-time at a diner, barely getting by. I could hear the weariness in her voice. And in that moment, I saw not just my mother, but a woman who had endured far more than I'd ever imagined. The next week, I flew to Wisconsin without telling her. I drove straight to the real estate office and bought her a home. A beautiful, cozy house on a quiet street, nothing extravagant. But warm and safe. The kind of home she never had. The kind I wished we'd shared when I was a kid. When I handed her the keys, she cried. And for the first time in years, I held her in my arms, not as the son who had been abandoned, but as the man who had found his strength. In forgiving her, I found healing. In helping her, I laid the foundation for peace. Some wounds don't fully close, but sometimes, love is enough to stop the bleeding. Word got around: in the music world, when you rise fast, people start talking. My story, once a quiet struggle in the shadows, had become public. People who had forgotten me now remembered. People who had ignored me now reached out. And among them, eventually, was him, my stepfather. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard he was still in Albuquerque, working minimum wage as a night security guard at a rundown supermarket. His drinking hadn't stopped. His temper hadn't cooled. Time hadn't softened him, it had just shrunk his world. Then came the messages. Short. Hesitant. Sent through old family friends or anonymous email accounts. "He's asking about you. He wants to talk. He says he regrets everything." I stared at those messages with a blank face and a tight chest. Regret? Now, where was his regret when he looked through me like I didn't exist? Where was it when I begged for a scrap of affection or at least the truth? Where was it when he shouted, "You're not even mine," like I was nothing more than a stain in his life? People asked why I didn't offer him help now that I had the means. "You've made it, Evans. You've got millions. Can't you forgive and help him too?" But they didn't understand. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. I had forgiven my mother because she was trapped and broken and tried, in her own way, to love. But him? He made a choice, every single day, to be cruel. And I made mine. I chose not to become him. I chose not to pass down his bitterness, his neglect, or his cowardice. I chose not to let guilt manipulate me into reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. I told my mother, gently but firmly, that he was not welcome in the house I bought her. She understood. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't about pride. It was about boundaries, about protecting the peace I had built from the chaos he left behind. Still, there were nights I'd sit alone in my studio and think about him. Not with anger, but with clarity. I wondered if he ever truly understood what he lost. If he looked at photos of me online and realized he had raised a millionaire and didn't even know it. Or if he still saw me as the boy he never wanted. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I was a man now, a man who had built a life from ashes, who had turned pain into purpose, who had created something beautiful from something broken. My story isn't about him. It's about choosing who I wanted to become, and I chose to be kind. I chose to be strong. I chose to be honest and whole, even when it hurt. I chose to build the life he told me I'd never have, and in doing so, I finally reclaimed it, not just the future, but myself. Please subscribe for more family revenge stories. Let's know your view about the story in the comments section.